President Muhammadu Buhari condoles Chad over tragic death of President Idris Deby.
NNPC advises motoring public against panic buying of petrol, says issues around scarcity being resolved.
SGF boss Mustafa leads advocacy and allays fear of Nigerians on COVID-19 vaccine safety in North Central Zone, Nigeria.
On Good Morning Nigeria today, our focus is on reviewing Nigeria's foreign policy.
Over the years, Nigeria as a nation has constantly pushed to be a worthy ally within her sphere of interest and influence to external relations, be it on the African continent or elsewhere, for that matter, on the global stage.
Very much so, Kyria. Now, at the core of understanding the international environment, Nigeria has had to take up and engage in many perspectives of bilateral and multilateral relations in the course of pursuing her foreign policy. And this, for many, have come with mixed feelings of benefits or being at a disadvantage, ultimately, to Nigeria's national interest.
Yes, indeed, because for many Nigerians, Nigeria safeguarding her interest and maximizing the gains of her relationship with the outside world are growing issues of concerns today.
Well, those issues include, of course, what some refer to as the contradictory nature, apparently, in Nigeria's foreign policy, steeped in the diverse rules of engagement, unequal strategies for reciprocities, even as Nigeria continues to commit to cooperating with other sovereign entities in maintaining its big brother image.
Yes, and this big brother image, Kingsley, as a matter of fact, did not work for us in Africa because our focal point of foreign policy has always been on the African continent.
That's
and
right.
That was why Nigeria contributed, in giving independence to so many African countries, South Africa particularly, and of course Sierra Leone, Liberia crisis, and what have you. But perhaps in the course of the program, we'll be able to also discuss the issues that
dwell on that. That's to say, what are the accruing benefits? I mean, some scholars would argue that you do not launch your foreign policy on the basis of expected benefits. But the counter argument to that is why expend so much resources in terms of men, material, and in some cases material, and yet what we get in return, and in the case of South Africa, we have seen xenophobic attacks against Nigerians. And it wasn't just only in South Africa.
Ghana, Gambia.
That's right. It's been the entire southern African continent that Nigeria focused on at one point. Nigeria was critical to the independence of Angola. Nigeria was critical to the independence of Mozambique in 1975. To the independence of Namibia, of Namibia in 1990, and Zimbabwe in 1980 as well.
At a point when Obasanjo was the military administrator of Nigeria, some government workers also had to pay some money.
Yeah, that was the Southern Africa Relief Fund. Students also made contributions to that fund to help the liberation struggle. So if you were a worker, I mean, you had part of your salary deducted for that purpose. Nigeria also offers scholarships and accommodation to Southern African students who, of course, had to leave Southern Africa, whether it was South Africa or Zimbabwe, to come study here. At least if some of them have, of course, never forgotten what Nigeria did. For instance, former President Thabo Mbeki. He remains a good friend of the country and a good friend of former President.
So back in the years, pre and post-independence, from fighting and raising her voice over issues of colonialism, as you just pointed out, apartheid on the continent, and the well-being of black race being discriminated against in other parts of the world, Nigeria could be said to have just picked through her foreign policy architecture as it worked at sustaining friendly brotherhood in most cases.
Well, the latter years of the 1980s saw Nigeria pushing a foreign policy with the diplomatic edge hinged on economic commitment and readjustment and structure. Now, this paved way, as it were, for certain shifts and triggered some of the current policies that we are witnessing. Part of what we are saying, what we saw in the 1980s, for instance, was what Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, who was then Minister of External Affairs, referred to as the concert of medium powers. It said, look, all right, we have the big powers, what about the medium powers? And also the idea of a black bomb. If the rest of the world was threatening the earth, with their own nuclear powers, why don't we also have a black bomb? But part of what came out of that, we mustn't forget, was a technical aid corps. The technical aid corps was a major creature of the Babangida administration.
And again, Nigeria was also part of the non-allied nations.
Well, that's right. Of course, that tells you that Nigeria didn't align with any of the major powers, whether it was the West or whether it was the East, to say we remained non-aligned. And for many years, the non-aligned movement was very influential.
Exactly.
At some point, there were 101 members.
During the Cold War era.
During the Cold War period. No question about that. And it is significant that as part of Nigeria's foreign policy, we have contributed significantly towards peacekeeping operations around the world.
Globally, yes, exactly. So today, as countries seek to create and reinforce favorable transnational images and cooperations in diplomatic policies towards one another, Nigeria, through her Parliament subcommittee, is this week engaging in conversations on the review of her foreign policy to reflect the changing dynamics globally.
All right, now, well, to recapture, as it were, the thought of the subcommittee, it says that foreign policy must be based on our interests. We have an enormous challenge. It is therefore imperative that we review not only our foreign policy, but indeed the totality of our system politically, socially, and economically. Again, that's according to the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee of the National Assembly.
All right, so the question to ask will be, in what way or ways should we be responding to these changing priorities and interests today? Is Nigeria's foreign policy strategic with corresponding national interest outlook in its involvement? And so we have guests to speak to these issues and more. Welcome to Good Morning Nigeria. My name is Kirian Umayo. Thank you for joining us this morning.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I join my colleague Kirian to also welcome you to the program. We are reaching you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. In the course of the program, we have our complimentary segments, and there's a newspaper review on business. And Kirian, by the way, since our focus is essentially on reviewing Nigeria's foreign policy, we must also just indicate some significant developments elsewhere around the world. In our headline, we already indicated that President Muhammadu Buhari has condoled with the people of Chad over the death of their president, Idris Deby. And yesterday as well, we saw what happened in Minneapolis, where the former police officer who knelt on the neck of George Floyd in May last year, knelt on his neck for well over 9 minutes, snuffing the life out of him, was convicted on all 3 counts. One of those counts, 40 years, another 25 years, another 10 years. Of course, I'm sure he's spending his time in prison at this moment.
That's a very good judgment.
Absolutely,
because,
no question about
America would have erupted if it was otherwise.
That's right. Okay, let's join Comfort Amodu for the highlights of the morning news. Comfort, good morning.
Good morning, Kingsley and Kirian. Welcome to the morning news. President Muhammadu Buhari has expressed sadness over the sudden and tragic death of President Idris Deby of Chad on the front line fighting against rebel soldiers. Reacting to the incident on Tuesday, President Buhari said, "I'm deeply shocked and devastated by the sudden death of Idris Deby on the battlefront to defend the sovereignty of his country." According to the president, the late Deby had played a very active role in our regional joint collaboration in the military campaign against the Boko Haram terrorists. President Buhari described the late Chadian leader as a friend of Nigeria who had enthusiastically lent his hand in our efforts to defeat the murderous Boko Haram terrorists that have posed grave security challenges not only for Nigeria but also our African neighbors, especially Chad. Cameroon and Niger Republic, while condoling with the people of Chad and their new leader. President Buhari called for greater collaboration to defeat the terrorists. In other news, the group managing director of the NNPC, Mele Kyari, is advising the motoring public to avoid panic buying of petrol as issues resulting in the scarcity of the product has been resolved. The NNPC boss stated this while briefing journalists after an audience with President Muhammadu Buhari. Mele Kyari also gives reasons why the NNPC declared that there will be no increase in the fuel price for the month of May.
There are engagements going on within government to get the best framework for having a fully regulated PMS market. As this is going on, we're engaging all parties and all stakeholders as government, and to make sure that at the end of the day, there's an exit that is beneficial to the ordinary man. And that is why we know we will not be able to complete that in the month of May, and therefore we declare that there will be no increase in fuel price.
Meanwhile, the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation (NNPC) has increased the daily supply of premium motor spirit petrol across the country from 550 trucks to 1,661 trucks to combat the build-up of fuel queues in some parts of the country. A statement by the Group General Manager, Group Public Affairs Division, Dr. Kenny Obateru, quoted the Managing Director of the Petroleum Products Marketing Company, Musa Lawan, as saying that they are about 2 billion liters of petrol in strategic depots across the country to keep the nation's supply for 2 months if no drop of fuel was imported in that period. The statement says reports reaching NNPC shows already trucks have started arriving filling stations, stressing that this would ease out the queues. Lawan disclosed that a 24-hour situation monitoring committee has been set up to track the movements of trucks from the depots to the various filling stations across the country, and that the ex-depot price of petrol will remain the same for the month of May, urging marketers not to engage in arbitrary price increase. Now the federal government is perfecting the national plan to mobilize resources that will be invested in security of schools and learning communities. Minister of Finance Zainab Ahmed disclosed this at a Finance Safe School Forum in Abuja.
Through a compact that will invest more in education to be able to provide our children the right type of education in the right, secure and safe environment.
And the Senate is considering a proposed legislation that seeks to establish a national policy on the protection of Nigerians' critical infrastructure. The bill, which has passed second reading, also seeks to establish a critical infrastructure protection task force.
The role of the task force will be to provide and facilitate and coordinate the provision of experts' guidance to critical infrastructure to detect, prevent, halt or confine an attack, and to recover and restore service.
The federal government is leading advocacy on the efficacy and safety of COVID-19 vaccines to allay fears of Nigerians on the vaccine. Presidential Steering Committee on COVID-19 and other key players in the health sector engaged stakeholders of the North Central Zone at a town hall meeting in Lafia.
While government will ensure the availability of the vaccines, the onus is on eligible citizens to demand for, make the extra effort to access the vaccines.
Our mission here today is first to reassure traditional, faith and community leaders that the vaccines Nigeria uses are well tested and are safe.
The latest figures from the Nigerian Center for Disease Control has confirmed additional 120 new cases of COVID-19 in the country. The latest figure indicates that Enugu State has 53 infections, Lagos 22, Rivers 18, Ogun 8, FCT has 7, Abia 6, Kano has 5, while Bauchi State has 1 new case. With this, Nigeria has 164,423 confirmed cases of COVID-19, out of which 154,406 were treated and discharged, while 2,061 patients died of the virus. And that concludes the news highlight. More will come up on Good Morning Nigeria with Kinsley and Kyria, and after this break, I'm Comfort Amodu.
My name is Nancy Oyedia Orom. I'm AIT correspondent. I've been covering the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 the last 1 year. I just took the jab, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, and it was seamless. And I was opportune to take these vaccines with the SGF, the ministers. So I want to use this medium as a journalist for someone who has experienced COVID in the last 1 year. I want to implore media houses, broadcast industries. Let's join hands together to propagate the good information out there for people to believe in these vaccines. That's the only way we can have health immunity and also achieve the projection and target of Nigeria come 2022. Well, I must implore all Nigerians to go out there, register on the Primary Healthcare Development Agency website. These vaccines are free for all Nigerians. Go to the website, register. It is free for you and I.
Download the Airtel TV app to watch all the fun and exciting performances of The Voice Nigeria Season 3 every Saturday on Views channel at 9 p.m. The Voice Nigeria, connected by
Airtel, the smartphone network.
If na one thing we are not like, na stubbornness so. Make you no near me or my family. Abi, you know they hear. I will deal with you drastically. I will deal with you protectively. They finish you nutritionally. Because this golden moon cereal where we dey enjoy for breakfast, it contains iron and vitamin C, where they help boost our immunity day by day. Oh yeah, if you like, come try me.
Golden Morn, make every day amazing.
Nestle, good food, good life.
Guess what?
What?
I scored a hat trick today.
Cool!
Wow!
And how did you celebrate?
Just do your hands like this.
And hold your nose like this?
Body odor is caused by germs. That's why you need the new improved Dettol Cool Soap, which protects against 99.9% odor-causing germs with an extra burst of menthol freshness. Dettol, be 100% sure.
Contemporary times require practical skills to remain competitive and relevant in your organization. Therefore, take advantage of NTA TV College short proficiency courses to sharpen your professional skills. Basic Broadcast Accounting and Auditing. Date 19th April to 30th April 2021. 2 weeks. Audio Engineering, Operations and Maintenance. Date 19th April to 23rd April 2021. 1 week. Protocol, Event Management and Public Relations. Date 3rd May to 14th May 2021. 2 weeks. Intermediate Camera Operation Techniques. Date 17th May to 11th June 2021. 4 weeks. The course fee for the 4-week course is 100,000 naira per participant. The fee for the 2-week course is 80,000 naira, while the course fee for the 1-week course is 40,000 naira only. Accommodation inclusive. Venue for all the courses is the serene and secure environment of NTA TV College near Old Government House, Rayfield, Jos. For more inquiries, please call 0803-314-4383 or 0806-980-9807. NTA TV College, Jos, training you to be the best you want to be.
Dialogue, empathy, love, and unity. These are vital components of nation building.
For all to be well, we appeal that we should refrain from volatile, provocative, inciting messages and language.
Let's build and not destroy.
It's the dawn of a new era on NTA's flagship program, The Sports Parliament, revitalized with lots of varieties, including feedback responses from viewers. Sports Parliament, the weekly sports show that exposes all the intrigues in the Nigerian sports sector and projects an agenda on the way forward for Nigerian sports. On NTA every Thursday at 10:30 p.m., running for 1 whole hour, discussing sports. The parliamentarians are more committed than ever to enlighten the viewers as the Sports Parliament takes it to a whole new level on the floor of the House. Keep a date with the Sports Parliament as motions are moved every Thursday on the floor of the House. Mr. Speaker, with his gavel to harmonize sports resolutions. The House have it.
It's Good Morning Nigeria, and we're live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. It's time for business, with the federal government seeking improved trade volume with South Korea. Let's join our correspondent Kule Adeyeye for details.
Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment Nii Adebayo, who hosted the South Korean ambassador to Nigeria, Kim Young-chai, remarked that the volume of trade between the two countries went down from $5 million in 2018 to $1.3 million in 2019. He said the presence of over 20 Korean companies in Nigeria has made it evident that the two countries have strong economic ties. With the takeoff of the African Continental Free Trade Zone, Adebayo implored Korean investors to take advantage of Nigeria's involvement in the AFCFTA in order to have access to Africa's large market. The minister also pleaded with Korean investors to invest in the new special economic zones in the 6 geopolitical zones of the country. As regards ease of doing business, Adebayo itemized one-stop investment center to provide a 48-hour delivery, ports upgrading, and establishment of special economic zones in pursuit of Nigeria's industrialization agenda, with the Korean ambassador pledging to make sure his country supports Nigeria's economic policies. And now to the details of Tuesday's tradings on the floor of the exchange. With business news, I'm Kunle Adeyeye.
Thank you, Kunle, for that business package. And next is newspaper review.
Our newspaper reviewer, Bayo Chebe, is with us in the studios for this morning's review. Bayo, good morning and welcome.
Thank you, Kinsley. Good morning. Good morning, Kirian.
You're welcome, Bayo.
Thank you. Good morning, Nigeria.
All right, so let's begin with the Daily Trust newspaper. The Daily Trust newspaper front page: commuters stranded as fuel scarcity rages in Abuja and others. As on page 18, EFCC detains ex-Zamfara Governor Yari. Page 8 is where you get the story. Now, the lead story this morning on Daily Trust: governors unanimous on killing of all bandits, terrorists. According to El-Rufai, the governor of Kaduna State. It has the 3 riders. Umahi to returnee herdsmen, stay where you are. But government pronouncement is in good faith, according to ACF. That's the Arewa Consultative Forum. Unemployment, root cause of insecurity. Fire me, as the governor of Ekiti State. The photo story there is, of course, that of the fuel crisis yesterday, where we had a number of queues in most fuel stations where we have fuel. Some, or many actually, they didn't have fuel at all. All right, below that we have a Debbie's death, Nigeria and Boko Haram insurgency. It's on page 3. 30 bandits, 10 residents killed as police repel attack on Zamfara villages. The package is on page 6. Now, police rescue girl from 10-year confinement in Kano. It can be found on page 23. Federal government warns UK against granting asylum to IPOB members. That story is also captured on page 4 of the Daily Trust newspaper. Kinsley.
Okay, let's take a look at the nation. The nation above the name flag says Presidency rules out National Conference. That's page 28. Girls have higher kidnap value, says El-Rufai. And tips on ending menace, that's the rider to that headline. Houses raised in another Benue tanker fire. And insecurity can consume Southeast. Umahi warns. Umahi is the governor of Ebonyi State. And below the nameplate, you have this headline: shoving convicted of murder in Floyd case. That's page 28. And bandits killed 10 in Zamfara. Details on page 5. And the photograph there is of one of the many queues that sprouted in Abuja yesterday. Now, this story comes with kicker. Experts on stable Chad will worsen Nigeria's insecurity. With two riders, Debbie's death has created a vacuum in Boko Haram battle, says Buhari, and why insecurity persists by Fayemi and Uzodimma. And also there on the front page, you have why UK may consider asylum for IPOB and MASOB members. It's disrespectful to Nigeria. That's the writer to that headline. Government targets $504 billion goods in Africa deals. And lastly, on the foot of the front page, government fears COVID-19 vaccine supply delay. INEC to restart voter registration. Bayo.
Thank you, Kinsley. Let's start with the President Muhammadu Buhari's condolence to the people of the Republic of Chad, especially on the death of President Idris Deby of Chad, and he has described it that a vacuum will be created in efforts to jointly confront Boko Haram terrorists as well as the Islamic State of West Africa province. He described the late Chadian leader as a friend of Nigeria who lended hands to efforts to defeat terrorism that have posed serious challenge to Nigeria and her neighbors. The Chadian leader, 68, died of injuries while fighting rebels in the north of Chad. He won election 11 days ago with nearly 80% of votes. Chad had imposed a curfew and shut its borders. The Chadian army has dissolved government and parliament and promised democratic election in 18 months transition. The son of the late Idris Deby, Muhammad Idris Deby, 37, has been appointed head of a military council. Idris Deby seized power in 1990 in a coup and was killed fighting rebels raised in the Tibet and Kanem provinces in the north of the area. The army said Deby had been commanding his army against rebels. He breathed his last defending the sovereign nation in the battlefield. The increase in petrol, the queues in petrol at petrol stations are beginning to simmer. This morning, it appears that the queues were shorter than they were yesterday. Meanwhile, the NNPC says that it has increased its daily supply of trucks from 550 to 1,661. This was a statement that was provided by the Group General Manager of Public Affairs. He says also the Managing Director of PPMC, the Petroleum Product Marketing Company, also says that there is available 2 liters of petrol at various depots across the country. And so if we didn't import fuel for 2 months, there is enough fuel to go around. Therefore, the NNPC is saying that there should be care and people should desist from panic buying. The Group Managing Director of NNPC, after briefing President Muhammadu Buhari yesterday, reiterated his earlier advice that there will be no increase as far for the petrol up to the month of May. This is to allow time for all negotiations going on about pump price. Meanwhile, the federal government says that the reported decision of the United Kingdom to grant asylum to alleged prosecuted members of IPOB is disrespectful to Nigeria as a nation. The Minister of Information and Culture, Alhaji Lai Mohammed, told news agencies forum that the design is unacceptable to Nigeria. He described it as akin to sabotaging the fight against terrorism and undermining Nigeria's security. In fact, he likened it to Nigeria offering asylum to members of IRA, Irish Republican Army, if you remember them, before 1990 Good Friday Peace Agreement. In another development, the presidential spokesman Garba Shehu said that secessionist agitators are enemies of Nigeria and should be ignored. He said secessionists cannot intimidate the president. These people cannot calling for secession are the problems of the country. He said, happily, reasonable voices are beginning to rise. Yesterday, he says, Afenifere said, we are not for secession. Ohanize Ndigbo, he says, said that over and over again, that they are not in support of dismembering Nigeria. He says secession as a threat is a sham. Yes, Nigeria, he says, we have problems, and the people, if we unite and love one another, we will come together and solve our problems. There's the human interest story you read about a girl in Kano who was locked up for 10 years by her own biological parents. The commissioner of police in Kano, Samaila Diko, put together a team of medical experts and detectives, and they were able to rescue the girl. The girl is now in Murtala Muhammad Specialist Hospital, Kano, where he's been looked after. The mother, Rabia, has been arrested. The father is said to be at large. In a related development, also relating to fugitives, 9 inmates who escaped from Owerri prison have been arrested in faraway Ghana. They had actually traveled to Ghana by ferry. So a divisional police commander in Ada, a division in Ghana, was able to, had on a tip-off, and they were able to arrest 9 of them. 9 of them with ages ranging between 25 and 47. They had gotten into Ghana by ferry. They had on them CD and Naira, as well as personal effects and passports and identity cards. They have been placed in custody. Meanwhile, in United States, Minneapolis police officer who forcefully restrained George Floyd last May with his knee has now been convicted of murder and manslaughter. Derek Chauvin, 45, was handcuffed and taken out of the court into custody. He was found guilty of 2nd and 3rd degree murder, as well as 2nd degree manslaughter. The death of George Floyd last May, if you recall, under the knee of Chauvin after he gasped, "I can't breathe," led to worldwide protests in the United States and around the world. The cause of justice apparently is about to be served.
Yeah, well, I'm interested in this story of Idris Deby, you know, this president for nearly 30 years, that, you know, had the courage, you know, of going to the war front, you know, leading and commanding in the war front. That's not common, you know. In Africa and elsewhere globally, a president of a nation, you know, because of course he has the military training, and he said, look, I have to do this myself, you know, I have to lead my men to fight terror in the country. For me, it's a big plus for such a man. You know, they're not many, you know,
the man is 67, and he came into power leading rebel troops from far away in Sudan to overthrow the government in Chad. And if you recall, just about a month or thereabout ago, when Boko Haram were terrorizing the fringes of Lake Chad, he led the troops to drive the Boko Haram terrorists across into Nigeria. And last Saturday, after he won elections, he felt it was also a challenge when another rebel group from the northern Tibet were threatening the northern Chad. He led troops there, and unfortunately, he died in action in the course of that.
Well, may his soul rest in peace. There are all kinds of allegations swirling around the exact circumstances of his death. I'm sure the coming days and weeks will reveal further details as to what actually transpired, whether there was sabotage, internal sabotage, or otherwise, or acts of treachery that led to his death. But his legacy, of course, is open to further debate, and Chad, we hope, will stabilize, because they have now declared, as it were, an 18-month period of military rule. But his son has been nominated to take over from him. His son is 37 years old.
Yes, he's a foster general.
Yeah, they just had, he was returned only on Monday as the winner of the election. So that's the key thing, and I'm sure that you know, Nigeria, of course, has to watch that axis much more closely now, because all the terrorists and all that might signal
exactly. Actually, the terrorists that were attacking have their base in Libya, and you know, Libya, there's a challenge there with Libya, with apparently several rebel groups having control of this, and so this is where the incursion was coming from. And incidentally, it's also the source of some of the illegal arms that have found their way into our country.
Yes. Well, strategic experts and even tactical experts will argue that the general doesn't necessarily have to be on the front line. It doesn't have to be. This is one of the hazards.
Yeah, but
This is one of the hazards. I mean, it's heartwarming to say that you are leading from the front.
General,
yes.
To lead a war, because in some cases, some military personnel, get promoted without even experiencing wars. And the military men are meant to fight wars. And someone will rise to a four-star general without even experiencing any kind of war in his lifetime, but he will be rising from one rank to the other. I don't know, but
I don't. You see, what I'm talking about now is being on the front line.
Yes.
There are persons who will plan your strategies. There are strategies not just related to how you shoot, when you shoot, how you get your supplies, how you retreat, how you deal with the enemy. Those are the issues, and those are not for full soldiers.
Really? In some war strategies, the generals are always in the rear guard.
Yes. Okay, that's one. As we said, justice has been served in the case of George Floyd, after he was murdered, as the verdict has said, by Derek Chauvin last year. But America, of course, recognizes that there are still deeper issues for it to confront, namely the criminal justice system, the overall justice system that is heavily against people of color. That's to say, persons of African American descent, Asian descent,
Hispanics too.
And Hispanics. That's part of what led to the global protests that we saw last year.
And in March alone, there are 47 different cases of shooting in America. And that's another issue in America, because America is becoming a gun state, so to speak.
It has always been a gun state, because the basic orientation is that they have a right to have their arms and they have a right to use it. So the concern, however, is that the basis for police person, especially the Caucasian police, targeting the colored person has not abated. Since George Floyd's case, there have been 1, 2, or 3 other instances already.
Even the
13-year-old boy
that was shot.
Another lady, said she wanted to bring out a taser, which is used to neutralize the person, and then she brought out a gun and blasted the individual, right in his chest. So it's another story. Well, we didn't see it on the front page. It happened last week. The world's biggest scammer in terms of Ponzi scheme, if you remember him, Bernard Madoff. In 2009, he was convicted of fleecing investors of tens of billions of dollars. He was convicted and sentenced to 150 years in jail in the U.S.
Wow.
He died last week at the age of 82. Bernard Madoff, the story made headlines around the world. Amongst those whom he scammed for a very long period of time included financial institutions and celebrities. Amongst them, of course, was the late Larry King. All right. Bye, we would like to thank you for being around today. See you again tomorrow.
Thank you, too.
It's Good Morning Nigeria live on NTA's network service. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue our program with a conversation segment on reviewing Nigeria's foreign policy.
شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن.
The Muslim Ummah are cordially invited to the 15th NTA, FRCN and Voice of Nigeria Ramadan lecture, scheduled for date 24th April 2021, time 9 a.m. inshallah. Topic: Causes and Solutions to Nigerian Security Challenges, the Islamic Perspective. Guest lecturer, Sheikh Dr. Jabir Sani Mehula, Head of Department, Arabic and Islamic Studies, Sokoto State University, Sokoto. The venue for the event is Lumana Multipurpose Center, River Close, off Jabi Road East, off Sultan Road, Kaduna. Chairman of the occasion, His Royal Highness Ambassador Ahmed Nuhubamali, Emir of Zazzau. Special guest of honor, His Excellency Malan Nasir Ahmed El-Rufai, the Executive Governor, Kaduna State. Hosts Yaqub Ibn Muhammad, Director General NTA, Dr. Mansour Liman, Director General FRCN, Dr. Sita Okechuku, Director General Voice of Nigeria. Announcer, Organizing Committee.
Guess what?
What?
I scored a hat trick today.
Cool!
Wow!
And how did you celebrate?
Just do your hands like this.
And hold your nose like this.
Body odor is caused by germs. That's why you need the new improved Dettol Cool Soap, which protects against 99.9% odor-causing germs with an extra burst of menthol freshness. Dettol, be 100% sure.
as Oni of Ife, as someone who cares about the well-being and safety of our people, it's time for each and every one of us to realize that COVID-19 is real and it has killed millions of people around the world. Scientists have developed this vaccine. The vaccine is safe for everyone and it contains no microchip, nor can it alter our DNA. However, we must continue to stay safe and stay clean, wear face masks, clean our hands on regular basis, and try as much as possible to avoid a very large crowd and gathering. For those who choose to be vaccinated, it will go a long way in protecting yourself and your loved ones from COVID-19.
Life is a game. We are cool. We are trendy. Energy moves us. Sports is our game, our oxygen. Because with the round leather, we ball. We hustle. All over the land, north and south, we are united in the positive glory. We are encapsulated by HIFL. We live for the game. It's game time. Showing on NTA Network.
We thank you for staying with us on the program up to this moment. And as a prompt to our conversation on the subject matter, reviewing Nigeria's foreign policy, here is a background report by Oyemi Ajayi.
Since independence, Nigeria's foreign policy has been hinged on the three concentric circles, which talked about Nigeria's relationship with our immediate neighbors, and this talks about the West Africa, Nigeria's relationship with Africa at large, and our relations with the rest of the world. Over the years, the country has worked around this, helping to place her on the global map with much recognition and respect for our roles and contribution towards global peace and development. In recent times, however, many have called for a review of the country's foreign policy due to dynamics of an ever-changing world. Some have pointed out some loopholes and contradictions in the foreign policy of the country, which they said needs to be worked upon. For example, the so-called neighboring countries benefit more from the big brother role of Nigeria, with Nigeria benefiting little or nothing from them. Some experts also talked about the need for improvement of services at some of the country's high commissions abroad, as they condemned the poor services given to Nigerians outside the shores of the country. In the words of the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Femi Gbajabiamila, says Nigeria must review its foreign policy to protect its national interest in the changing global community. Review was long overdue, as some things have changed since 1960s, when Nigeria's foreign policy first came into play.
Our nation's foreign policy should define the terms on which we engage the rest of the world to address the different manifestations of our shared challenges so that we can each and together survive through this new age of promise and peril.
Foreign policy is therefore dynamic and responsive to changing priorities and interests.
Though the country's foreign policy is anchored on the pillars of good neighborliness, peaceful coexistence with all countries, on African regional cooperation and multilateralism. But the question is, how much benefit has it been for Nigeria? Also, in what direction and ways should the review take? These are some questions begging for answers from guests already seated in the studio for Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you, Oyemi Ajayi, for that backgrounder. We actually have guests not just in the studio but also from remote locations joining us via Zoom. Let's begin by first introducing our guests who are with us this morning by Zoom. We have Professor Bola Akinteriwa, who is a former Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, that is the nation's foremost foreign policy think tank. Professor Akinteriwa, delighted to have you again, and good morning, Nigeria.
Good morning, Nigerians.
And also joining us via Zoom is a former Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and a regular on Good Morning Nigeria, Ambassador Joe Keshi. Ambassador Keshi, delighted to have you this morning.
Good morning, Kingsley, and your colleague, and good morning, Nigerians.
Yes, and with us in the studio here for the program is Ambassador Bulus Lolo. Ambassador Lolo is the former Permanent Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs. You're welcome to the program.
Thank you, and good morning, Nigerians.
We also have Honorable Yusuf Baba Yakub. Well, we actually had expected to have him here on the program, but unfortunately, he's not here this morning. So, Kingsley, we may have to start this conversation.
That's right. Let's begin, of course, in studio, and then migrate to other two very capable guests who are with us via Zoom today. Ambassador Bulus Lolo. Let's consider the foreign policy environment for us. I mean, one of the commonest things we hear about Nigeria's foreign policy is the landmark statement by Nigeria's first Prime Minister, Alhaji Tafawa Balewa, when he, of course, declared what Nigeria's objective was in the foreign arena at independence. Of course, there have been shades of differences, perhaps a reinforcement over time, but you've been a custodian, as it were, of Nigeria's foreign policy. So tell us what the character of our foreign policy has been, and whether there is indeed a necessity for a change at this time.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning once again. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to say that the program this morning is one that has been very, very close to my heart. While I was in service in 2015, to be specific, I drew attention to the 1986 Kuru Conference on the review of Nigeria's foreign policy, which was the last time, as far as I remember, that such an exercise took place. And the Kuru Declaration at the time became a landmark reference point in looking at our foreign policy. And 2015 then was 29 years away, since Kuru, and I thought that by now, government would have organized a comprehensive review of Nigeria's foreign policy. You asked what has been the character. Indeed, no one can define foreign policy without acknowledging that it is dynamic and very fluid. And therefore, states who are the main actors, but today we have other non-state actors that have become critical in foreign policy discourse, who then impact on what we all regard as foreign policy. And for those who may wonder, what is foreign policy? Foreign policy is essentially the extension of a country's domestic policy externally, because that's the milieu where it takes place. Therefore, what happens within your country, you bring to bear externally in relation to other actors. I've already acknowledged that there are state actors and non-state actors. And indeed, the content of foreign policy is one that keeps changing with time. A review may not necessarily have to focus on the objectives of the foreign policy that, in my view, are still relevant today. Some of the principles, too, on which we build our foreign policy are also relevant. But what about those that have been affected over time? In our foreign policy principles and objectives, we do have this issue about apartheid. Apartheid is no longer with us. We have racism that has refused to die. How are we interacting with the rest of the world on these issues? So in a nutshell, looking at what we do externally and in relation to what we are doing internally should be something that we undertake from time to time. And that is why I advocated, and in fact, as recent as last month, I remember granting an interview to Leadership newspaper, in which the headline to that interview was my call for a review of Nigeria's foreign policy. So I really welcome this opportunity, and much more so that NTA is also taking the lead in highlighting what the issues ought to be in a review of our foreign policy.
All right, thank you indeed. They've raised some pertinent issues, with respect to the principles upon which our foreign policy, or policies, were based. Ab initio, but now there have been many calls, including yours, as to the reasonability of doing a review of the nation's foreign policy to be in tandem with the dynamics of today's world. And I want to bring in Ambassador Joe Keshi, who is also from former Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's all agreed, sir, that there should be a review of the nation's foreign policy. I'm also going to ask you, in what areas, would you think that this review should take? What are the dimensions, that we think are so pertinent to this review?
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me again. I did not get the totality of your question, but I guess you're trying to say what areas or aspects of the foreign policy that needs review. If that is right, I would try to answer your question. But first, let me just say that I'm beginning to think that dynamic as we all claim that foreign policy is, this country probably is one country that has done a lot to review its foreign policy consistently over time. And my colleague at the studio has really explained the need for a review, given the dynamic nature of foreign policy itself and the changing environment in which we are operating today. So it makes sense that it should be reviewed as often as we can. But I think the fundamental thing we need to bear in mind, in my view, is that some of the fundamentals remain till today, as enunciated by the Prime Minister. If you look at the number of countries, certain cardinal principles don't change, because at the end of the day, foreign policy is in defense of your national interest. And what changes perhaps is the circumstances that of your own environment. And in Nigeria today, our environment has changed dramatically, far away from what it was in the 60s or in the 70s or in the 80s, which necessitates the fact that we need to factor in current realities in the execution of our foreign policy, because that will help the diplomats on the field, to know exactly not just how to project the country, but how to defend the country, as well. And as my colleague pointed out, there has been new actors that we need to factor in any foreign policy consideration. But the fact remains that whatever happens to any foreign policy has to do with the domestic environment. And I'm fond of stressing this, and we must not forget that the strength of any foreign policy depends on the domestic environment. If the domestic environment is weak and disorganized, don't expect the foreign policy to be strong either. And so whatever we do in time, whether we review the foreign policy today, tomorrow, or next year, we must understand that reviewing the domestic environment, strengthening the domestic environment, making a lot of things happen at the domestic level, it's what will strengthen our foreign policy and what will give strength to whatever is done by our diplomats outside the country. I'll probably stop here for now.
Okay, Ambassador Keshi, thank you very much. But we'll of course return to you shortly. But let's bring in now Professor Bola Akinterewa, as we already introduced him, former Director General of NIA. Prof, I would like us to back up a bit and take advantage of your experience as well as background in the foreign policy arena. Just in terms of evaluation, because we keep hearing, all right, foreign policy is dynamic, foreign policy is a projection of your domestic interest. But we do know, as scholars have said, that this dynamism and this projection of your domestic interest is often grounded in theoretical principles, sometimes referred to as doctrines. How much does doctrine govern our foreign policy formulation that the actors, such as the two former permanent secretaries we have here, then go out to implement? So when you are conceiving your foreign policy, I mean, the realism school, for instance, will tell you that nations fear each other. And so, therefore, your foreign policy must be on the basis of deterrence, on the basis of what you need to do so that you don't get overwhelmed by others. What governs our foreign policy articulation and projection?
Thank you for the analytical answers you have already given to the question you asked me. Let me begin by agreeing to disagree with the two diplomatists. I do agree with Ambassador Lolo that there is need for a foreign policy review, believing that we should have had a foreign policy review since the last one, 1986. You see, when we are talking about review, I think there are three types. And he focused essentially, like Ambassador Keshi rightly did, on what he called comprehensive foreign policy review. There has always been regular foreign policy review. Ambassador Lolo, Ambassador Keshi, they know more than I do in this case. They know quite well that our plenipotentiaries, our ambassadors are regularly having, from time to time, foreign policy reviews. They call it regional reviews. So our ambassadors meet regularly to look at this foreign policy implementation, the challenges, and they are addressing. But when we now look at, for instance, the scope, we can now say that one may not be comprehensive in terms of the stakeholders involved, not necessarily in terms of the issues discussed. I do agree with him that foreign policy is an extension of the domestic policy. And Ambassador Keshi is again very right by saying, look, if the domestic environment, is weak, then how will you expect a dynamic foreign policy externally? You see, my own definition of foreign policy, as much as I also agree that, look, there's a nexus between the domestic and the external, foreign policy is essentially the pursuit of certain interests in international relations, basically aimed at defending, protecting, and advancing national development strategy back home. Now, from that explanation, we will now see that there's a distinction between foreign policy as a focus and foreign policy as a technique. When, for instance, Ambassador Lolo said that we need not have a review of objectives, he's now talking about foreign policy as a focus, and he's right. And Ambassador Keshi again is right by saying that, okay, look, if your home environment, economy is weak, you cannot expect any vibrancy. But I think that in this case, where I disagree is that I bring Professor Bolaji Akinyemi into the question. He has argued that rather than use the domestic environment to attain your foreign policy objectives, you can also use the international environment to advance, to raise, to push forward the domestic interests. So it has to be both domestic, international, relating here and there. That's why he came up with the idea of a concert of medium powers, according to which you can be weak at home. But look, let me tell you, I know these Lolos, I know these species. They have sagacious minds. Now it is intelligence. It is the extent of the sagacity, you know, your attitudinal disposition that drives foreign policy. Because you are asking me now to look at the basic, the fundamentals of foreign policy. It is a priori the extent to which you have skills, tacts to deal with the other interlocutor. Let me tell you, for instance, in Nigeria, nobody teaches physiognomy. They study international relations, but unlike in advanced countries where they teach physiognomy, you look at your interlocutor, you look at the other negotiator, you look at the movement of his eyes, the cornea, and try to predict his intentions. They don't teach that one here. So what drives foreign policy begins with the extent of knowledge, experience, all right, in diplomatic negotiations. This is very lacking. There are other fundamental principles too. For instance, we raised the issue of Ambassador Lulu told us that there is no more appetite. It cannot be more correct. That's to tell you that Nigeria used to have a foreign policy focus, but we don't have anything now. All that we are doing basically is to react. And this is why, you know, when we talk about a review, it can be partial, it can be holistic in practice. And I think that two basic fundamental principles that we should focus attention on in this discussion is to look at the doctrines, the policies, the principles. For instance, is a non-alignment principle still valid? Do we need that? Do we need reciprocity? You talk about a good neighborliness in the report we were giving. Is good neighborliness good? If it is good, to what extent? Why will, for instance, Nigeria be sustaining the Gambia, many countries like that, and then they will go to the UN and still vote against us, in spite of the fact that the ECOWAS has already adopted the Nigerian candidate as ECOWAS candidate? ECOWAS will present the same ECOWAS candidate to the African Union. African Union will now change the nature of the candidature and say this is African candidate. Now, African candidate will now go to the UN. Then a country in West Africa will now come to vote against us or having reservation and so on and so forth. Why shouldn't the principle of reciprocity apply in this case? So you see, there are many principles that we need to factor in if we say we want to review foreign policy, so that Nigeria cannot just a big giant for nothing.
Thank you. You have actually raised some perspectives to this conversation. Well, you agreed with Ambassador Lulu and Keshi in some areas, and of course disagreed with Lulu in other areas. I want to bring him in here because take, for instance, the U.S. foreign policy. What I admire about the foreign policy is the fact that irrespective of government in power, there are policies of American government that have been sustained for several years, right? For whatever dynamic or dynamism we're talking about, but then they tend to be firm on issues that I've agreed on foreign policy, especially as it relates to different regions of the world. Now, today, as you rightly pointed out, I can tell Professor Akintanen that we don't have a particular focus in terms of a comprehensive, ideology of what should form our foreign policy with respect to the dynamism that we're experiencing today globally. And so let me bring in Mr. Lolo once again. What are the issues he didn't agree with you, and how does that really touch on the nation's foreign policy, and what in your opinion should form the character of a review, as you have always advocated?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kiran, and welcome the comments that I've heard both from Ambassador Keshi and Professor Akinteriwa, two individuals that I respect very highly. When we speak about a foreign policy review, and I want to disagree slightly with Professor Akinteriwa on this, when he says that there has always been a review. You cannot take a review by one side and equate it with a comprehensive review of Nigeria's foreign policy. I was in the service, Ambassador Keshi was my senior in the service as well, and therefore we both know and acknowledge that from time to time there is an internal discussion on Nigeria's foreign policy. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has the primary responsibility, for instance, to manage Nigeria's foreign policy. But when I advocate for a review, and let me also use that word comprehensive, it has to be comprehensive. I'm referring now to the content of our foreign policy. I'm referring to the character of our foreign policy. I'm referring to the style of our foreign policy. I'm referring to the delivery capability and capacity of our foreign policy, as well as the results. And in this, it is not going to be one person. It has to be the totality of the assets that we have. And it has to involve the three arms of government. It has to involve Nigeria's intelligentsia. It has to involve the civil society. And more fundamentally, it also has to involve that very Nigerian in whose name both the government within and its agents abroad speak on behalf of. Our constitution says, we the people. Who are the people? Are they involved in foreign policy formulation? And therefore, necessarily, a review of foreign policy should bring together this constellation of players to come together and agree. When you talk of your national interest, what is the context of that national interest today? When you talk about implementation of foreign policy, who are the people that are implementing the foreign policy? And here I want to underscore what Ambassador Keshi said regarding the strength of your domestic policy. Only yesterday, a verdict was read in Minneapolis in the United States on a horrendous crime that was committed in the full glare of the world on TV. The murder of George Floyd, sorry. If Nigeria is endowed, as we often lay claim to and pronounce that we are the leaders of the black world, do we have the voice to speak and others will hear and respect us that indeed Nigeria is the leader of the black race? What if within our own judicial system a crime takes place that is horrendous, but the outcome is scandalous? How will anyone take you seriously? And there are many such issues in which there has to be consistency, there has to be coherence, and there has to be relevance in what we say and what we do. And this is why we must recognize as a people that the conduct of our domestic policies is as important as what we want to say abroad to be believed. And here I'm saying, can Nigeria be seen and regarded as Africa's authentic voice? Equally, can our democracy be measured as one that is inclusive, one that is accountable, one that takes care of the needs of the most vulnerable in our society? Because out there, we may find ourselves speaking about the underprivileged. We may find ourselves speaking on issues of justice and equity. How relevant are we? How believable will Nigeria be? Especially if you charge your top diplomats to go and define it. And here I go back to my days in the university to recall the definition of a diplomat that my lecturer taught me. And he said a diplomat is an honest person who may find himself or herself telling lies on behalf of his government without losing face. I don't believe that diplomats are liars, but a circumstance can force you. Right now in Myanmar, for instance, and Russia, there are issues that are very current, and their top diplomats, especially at the United Nations, step out in front of the TV. What we say, defending the indefensible, is a painful duty, and we must not make our diplomats to go through that.
Ambassador Bulus Lolo, thank you very much there for the elaboration further still on aspects of our foreign policy and what we need to do. Ambassador Joe Keshi, I'm tempted to go back to the theoretical framework. If you want to speak to that, that's fine. So that, I mean, as scholars often indicate, theory influences practice, and practice also influences theory. But there are two aspects of what Ambassador Lolo said. Look, he says, can Nigeria be Africa's true, authentic voice? Yes, past, certainly yes. When Nigeria spoke and said, look, Africa must be free, the rest of the world listened to Nigeria. As part of the projection of our domestic strength to the foreign environment, he also says, is our democracy respected so that we can speak on democratic issues around the world? Which brings in the point about stakeholders, that it isn't just a matter, foreign policy review isn't necessarily a matter for, say, those who are in the foreign policy practice division, but indeed the intelligentsia, the three arms of government, and even very critical classes, such as the political class. What is your take on this?
Thank you, Kingsley. Let me begin first by agreeing totally with what Ambassador Lolo has said to you all, and of course we come from the same background and institution, so you can understand my support for him, and also my good friend Prof, whom I disagree on some of the positions, but I leave that. The only comment I want to make about what Ambassador Lolo said before I respond to your question is that Ambassador Lolo, to be candid, in those days, diplomats used to lie for their country. But the truth is that today, if you do lie, the CNN would suddenly reveal your lies. So the CNN effect has cautioned the diplomats against lying, because if you are lying that there's peace in Nigeria, and there's no insecurity in Nigeria, and that everything is going on well, and then CNN is given a different, report, you actually make your diplomats liars. This is why I say to diplomats, when you are confronted with these things, find a way to rationalize the situation while you are trying to defend your country. Look, I believe in answer to your question, I think the point we must not really forget, and I keep making this point, is that no matter what we do internationally at the external environment, our strength has to do more with what operates at home. We can be Africans' voice, but for us to be Africans' voice, and in fact, I believe that we are designated for obvious reasons to be Africans' voice. But for you to be able to project that voice, there are certain things that you need to put in place. You spoke of our democracy. Look, yes, it is functioning. It's going to 20 years of democratic practice and so on. But if you really want to be candid, will you advise anybody to emulate Nigeria's democracy? You know how it operates. You will not. And so you cannot go out and begin to advise somebody and tell somebody, look at the way we are operating our democracy. Again, the guy who's been watching CNN or BBC or Al Jazeera, knowing what is going on in your political space, will simply laugh off at you. Or you can't go out preaching peace and security. You can't go out preaching fairness and justice when even at home you are not doing the same thing. So to be an African voice, it's not simply to say because you have the population, you have a military that is strong, by the way, that is today weak, or that you have an economy that is booming, which today is not booming and is in crisis. These, again, I make the point that these are what gives you the voice when you are talking of foreign policy. And your colleague referred to the American system. When someone like President Biden wants Russia about the opposition leader, that there will be consequences, I disagree with that language. But the Americans can do that because they have the capacity to do whatever they want to do. And that goes back to the point I keep making any time, that anybody who wants to blame the execution of foreign policy today is welcome to do that. But you must not fail to realize that we cannot punch above our weight or something like that. It is the domestic environment we need to fix, number one. When you fix the domestic environment, you also begin to look at the machinery. The machinery for foreign policy implementation, including the choice of who becomes minister, including the choice of the people you recruit into the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because all these matter at the end of the day. You can't have people who, as I think Dodo said, you can't have people who are not knowledgeable, who do not have the flair, who cannot even speak, who cannot project, or who are not prepared to, conform themselves, with the discipline that is required to work in the foreign ministry. So, the point I will end with is that, fine, we can review, but when we finish the review, which is very necessary because it brings in all actors. But by the way, the ongoing review, it's not doing that. I was at the event. I did not see enough academics. I did not see enough civil society. At the end of the day, it looks as if it was just a dialogue between the foreign ministry, retired ambassadors, and some members of the National Assembly. No, this is not how reviews are done. Reviews are comprehensive. You bring in everybody, and everybody takes a position. And because in bringing in everybody, new ideas, new components are added that enable us to now come up with what can now become the guiding principles of our foreign policy in a dynamic and changing world. And finally, I want to say to Prof in particular, when you mention the Gambia opposing us in these international organizations and so on. I've acquired a new experience recently when I had to campaign for the Nigeria's candidate at the AU, and recently. What goes wrong in what we do is that we should understand that reaching out to your friends is not a one-day or one-time affair. You have to be consistently in touch with your friends. You have to consistently let your friends know exactly where you stand. And you don't come at the last minute. You can't call me up no matter how friendly we are, that look, I forgot to tell you yesterday, my daughter is getting married at 7 a.m. this morning, and I'm in Abuja, and you are in Lagos, and I want you there. How do I get there? So this is the essence, because when we went around to campaign for the candidates, Nigerians candidates, guess what? We made 55 over 55. All African countries voted for us. Why? Because when we went out and read that to everybody, they felt they were respecting them. They felt that they counted. They felt that they mattered. And they told us to our face that, yes, this is the Nigeria we know. This is the Nigeria we want to, that accept that, yes, you are a leader. Everybody accepts Nigerian leadership. What they are unhappy about is that Nigeria is not prepared to really project that leadership as everybody expects us to do.
Yes, I think that's the point that which I'm going to start from. That Nigeria is not providing the leadership that has been expected of her as a nation. We may recall actually that our foreign policy before now were based on Africa. Focal point is Africa, and of course Nigeria did well in terms of during the crisis we had in several African countries. We actually funded the ECOMOG then in Liberia, in Sierra Leone. We did a lot about apartheid, and also helped in ensuring that some African nations got their independence in Namibia and the rest of them. Right, and it is said that the behavior or direction of a nation is determined by the character of persons who are holding authority or positions of authority in that country. So whatever direction that Nigeria is going is determined by us domestically. And I want to align myself with what Lolo said. Comprehensive review of foreign policy will determine a better direction for Nigeria. And I want to bring in Professor Akinterenwa here. Now, you have told us that there has always been review of foreign policy. You may have to clarify that, because from what we've heard from the two ambassadors, there has not been any comprehensive review of the nation's foreign policy. We expect to ensuring that the three arms of government are involved, the civil society involved, the intelligentsia, the Nigerian public, as key holders were involved. So, are you advocating that there should be no comprehensive review of our foreign policy, that we should fall back on what it used to be?
For your question again, I thank you, because the two of you are always asking very sagacious questions. You see, when we talk about review, we easily forget that the concept of review is different from the concept of amendment. Amendment is different from modifying. When you are modifying a text, when you are reviewing, conceptually, legally, they mean different things. Now, when we are talking about the comprehensiveness of foreign policy, Ambassador Lolo talked about some of the constituents. He talked about character. He talks about content. He talks about capacity, and so on and so forth. We will not say he's not correct. The only thing is that he cannot be more correct. But when you are correct, you are still ignoring many other salient factors. And I ask this question: how do you determine comprehensiveness? I am, first of all, positing here that no country of the world, including the United States, can have any factor of comprehensiveness in his foreign policy making. Why? Because the issues involved are indeterminable. You can only deal with the issues you know. Issues are evolving on daily basis. So when you say you are reviewing, what are you reviewing? You can only review in terms of foreign policy technique, foreign policy strategy, how to respond to the changing challenges. Now, the issues, which we can call content in this case, they have unlimited scope. In terms of participants, who are those people that will be involved? Ambassador Keshi rightly pointed out that he had the opportunity to participate in the review processes, that it is essentially more of a dialogue between the foreign ministry and a host of others. Civil societies are not there. Academics are not there. You see, we do not always have a conceptual, clarification of what we are pursuing and the strategy. Please, I am not saying that we should not have a comprehensive foreign policy review. What I am trying to say is that Ambassador Lolo posited that since 1986, there has not been a foreign policy review. and we can put the epithet, we can also put the comprehensive as an adjective to qualify it. Comprehensive foreign policy review. When I referred to the regional foreign policy review by ambassadors, I was to add that academics are regularly also reviewing foreign policy. But when we talk about comprehensiveness in this case, is it when all the stakeholders all put together come to sit down and discuss that makes the review comprehensive? Is it when all the issues in foreign policy, all right, are put together and being discussed that we talk about comprehensiveness? Is it when we have 2, 3 days, 4, 5 days comprehensive foreign policy, sitting down discussing that it becomes comprehensive? No. You see, the word comprehensive itself is at best very relative. The beauty of it all, if you look at the changes in the world as of today, let's look at international relations as of today. We are likely to be challenged by 2, 3 main factors. The United States has told the world now that all countries that are against LGBT will not have any aid, no assistance, especially in the security area. They will not give any assistance. Now look at that one. How are we preparing for that? That's one critical issue. Now look at the factor of immigration, the new policy. Immigration is a global issue. Now the conditionalities being attached to the grant of visa for immigration and so on and so forth, they are very conflicting and they are not in the interest of Nigeria. Now if Ambassador Kechi disagrees with me, I like that one because that is the beauty in psychology of human differences. Everybody is considering different factors, and that's why we have different versions of the truth at any given time. You see, the beauty of his argument also remains that, look, if you have a strong domestic base, you'll be able to perform better. I agree. But I am saying that you can also make use of the international environment to improve on your domestic base. How? For instance, look at the United States. We have some Nigerians now in the administration of Joe Biden. Okay? Now, the American environment, very strong institutions. If we sit down, we use the sagacious minds of our diplomats. I normally differentiate between an ordinary diplomat and a diplomatist. For me, a diplomatist is someone who has the representational character as defined by the 1961 Vienna Convention, representing, protecting national interests. When you combine that one, that representational factor, with the capacity for intellectual development, intellectualizing, bringing new ideas, strategizing in the Kissengerian manner, please, then you are a diplomatist. And that's the beauty of it. We don't have diplomatists, many of them, in the system. We are at best reactive. So when we are discussing this type of issue, the beauty of NTA presenters, for instance, when we are discussing this type of foreign policy issue, is that they ask questions that take you beyond the known already. So talking about what we already know will not take us anywhere, but now trying to look at emergencies, situational scenarios in the future. That is how we can talk about comprehensive review. And comprehensive review now is that, look, the human knowledge is also limited. You don't know what will happen tomorrow. 2 days ago, nobody knew that Idris Deby will be killed. They've just announced the result of an election. And in this case, the next thing, characteristic of him, he went to visit the soldiers to give them moral support. But he didn't know that he was going to meet his Waterloo there. So how do you prepare? How do you talk about comprehensive review of what you do not know? So you can never have anything like comprehensive review. You can always review to the maximum of the extent of your interest that you know. That is the point I'm making. I am not saying that we should not have comprehensive review or that there is no need. There is need to have a comprehensive review, but putting comprehensive to the extent of the known, not the unknown.
Professor Bola Akintarewa, thank you very much there for your viewpoint. Substantially, for your sagacious presentation. In substance, Kieran, I don't think there's any fundamental difference between the nuances of what Professor Akintarewa and the retired ambassadors are also talking about. But
because they all agree that there should be a review.
There should be a review. How comprehensive? Professor Akintarewa says, look, how is it comprehensive to the extent that you have many more participants? Is it comprehensive to the extent that you are looking at the content of the foreign policy and sketching situational scenarios? He was talking about three likely issues that we should worry about, but he mentioned only two of them. We talked about the push of the LGBT idea worldwide by the US, for instance, and then immigration policy. The third one he didn't quite touch on. But Ambassador Keshi made a point. I don't know whether Ambassador Lolo also witnessed this, that look, the foreign policy review that he attended, he saw only members of the retired corps of ambassadors and members of the National Assembly. And you have to ask this question, what again is the Kieran, what is the usual linkage between our think tanks and the academia? I think that there's virtually no university where courses are not being offered in history and international studies at undergraduate level. Exactly. And at graduate level, you're having masters in international relations, masters in international diplomacy. So where are the scholars of these fields? Are you not benefiting, or you think you cannot benefit from their contribution to say, look, this is the analysis, the people are writing 10 papers, they are writing dissertations. So what is the value in those dissertations? And sometimes we wake up again and say that our universities are producing unemployable individuals. What is the linkage? Have you brought them into this mix? It may very well be then that the current review probably is just developing a working document for a more elaborate review going forward. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue with the conversation.
My name is Boss Mustafa, the Secretary to the Government and the Chairman of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19. I've just had the rare privilege of taking my first dose of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, and I can tell you that we are doing very well in terms of our response and the administration of the vaccines all over the country. As strategic leaders, we are supposed to lead by example, and the President did precisely that on Saturday with the Vice President, and we are continuing in that particular direction. The essence of taking these vaccines is to help us really fight this COVID-19 virus, and the combination of the non-pharmaceutical measures and the vaccine is the way to go in 2021 and thereafter.
I bring you wonderful news. The village headmaster is coming back to your screen. Mo wire abi mi o wire.
Teacher Jowo, a fẹ́ lọ wá nǹkan jẹ. Teacher Jowo, a fẹ́ lọ wá nǹkan jẹ.
The premiere of the new season of The Village Headmaster, initially scheduled for the second quarter of 2021, has now been postponed till further notice. We apologize for this short notice and promise to keep our viewers and advertisers informed as soon as we have a new date.
And I know that even you too, you are getting a lot of orders. Hey, we are trying, shao.
These days, people get their news and information from more media sources than ever before.
Some of the news and information given are fake, unverified, doctored, and manufactured to create confusion, stir disaffection, and cause disunity. Before you believe or share any news, ask yourself, is this real? Is it from a credible source? Is it verified or verifiable? Fake news is dangerous, whether you do it for fun or for political gains. Real people can get hurt. Fake news, don't create it, don't spread it.
This is a public service announcement from NTA. Life can be very eventful. We curiously expect things to happen, even when we don't know what. Our human nature makes us like and repost lots of information. Some are unverified, inciting anger and hate. Sometimes innocently, other times the urge to break it first. This, in most cases, has caused destruction in many nations.
My name is Dr. Faisal Shuaib. I am the Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency. Earlier today, I took my first shot of the AstraZeneca vaccine. Despite all of the delays, all of the doubts, here we are, Nigerians can finally access the vaccines. I hope that Nigerians will come out and get this vaccine because these vaccines are safe, they're effective, and they truly work. Over the course of the next few weeks, we have to continue wearing face masks. We have to do social distancing, but I know eventually once we're able to get herd immunity, then we'll be able to stop all of these non-pharmaceutical interventions. To get the vaccination, you should go to the NPHCDA website. There's a link on there that you click and you can register and schedule exactly where you want to get your vaccine.
All right, you're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria, and we're live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Kieran, we have some tweets that have come in. Let's quickly take them and then return to our guests.
Okay, Motana Farouk, learning from others is an added advantage, but living the life of others will never make one's potential to be actualized. Most of the foreign policies in Nigeria neither favor Nigeria nor the ordinary man on the street. Take a look at our currency with IMF and the World Bank's policy.
Festus Akimboyewa, the review of very old foreign policy is welcome. This review must be comprehensive and its contents should be debated by Nigerians because Nigerians hold an important stake.
Mike Anyako, for years, Africa had been centerpiece of foreign policy. This must stop as we gain nothing from the venture. The whole world should be our focus. We must rejig our embassies because many of them are just existing without any support from the country.
Dele Jack Solomon tweets, Africa as the centerpiece of Nigeria's foreign policy no longer suffices. A broader perspective is necessary. Nigeria should endeavor to put into consideration current trends in international relations and diplomacy, such as globalization, human rights, and democracy.
Now, I think it's, okay, Law Afasi. Law Afasi says the subsisting Nigerian foreign policy is Africa-centered, but with the myriads of internal problems, and none of these African countries coming to help out, behooves Nigeria to reset her foreign policy initiative.
Chris Simeon tweets, one of the objectives of Nigeria's foreign policy is the promotion and protection of Nigeria's national interest. My question is, do our leaders and politicians promote national interest, or are they fighting for their selfish interests? So these are some of the tweets that we can take in the meantime. Let's bring in one more time now Ambassador Bulus Lolo. Ambassador Bulus Lolo, there is quite a lot on the plate. I mean, you talked about content of our foreign policy, objectives, perspective, its character, style, and the principles on which we have built this foreign policy. As you very well know, I mean, I can mention theory in passing, but when you say principles derive from theory. That's your understanding of an issue, and there are a number of issues on the table right now. You also have mentioned climate change, human trafficking, terrorism, and the whole idea of seeking to push the LGBT idea by say the U.S. and some Western countries. Do we, as a country, need to worry about these matters and therefore frame them into our foreign policy matrix so that we would know how to then respond? There are other practical issues that we will deal with in terms of being, foreign policy in action. Do we have a sufficient idea? Look, our neighbors, for instance, just how well are they doing? We do know that a number of our neighbors, if not most of them, have linkages with other powers. Have we been able to overcome that so that some of these critical issues that we are talking about, terror, for instance, that has been around us now for well over a decade and has hobbled our security system. What is it that we need to do so that we have better foreign policy results?
Well, thank you very much, Kingsley. And first, let me say that so far, our discussion, I think, has brought out the core issues that make up the content of Nigeria's foreign policy in a way. But what may be lacking is sufficient understanding and appreciation of what we talk about when we say we are talking about our foreign policy. And this is the need I want to borrow from our own internal language, which is very common here, that we carry people along. I had said much earlier that government acts in the name of the people. As a student in the university, I recall a lecturer had set a sessional examination in political science in which he said, he asked the students, people, who the hell are the people? Now, if you ask this question, when we go out and say we are working and acting in the name and interest of Nigerians, who are we talking about? And number two, what is that interest of the Nigerians? Is it the same interest as we see internally? And that is why when we talk of the impact of foreign policy being what obtains domestically that you project externally, I will agree here with what Professor Akinteriwa is pushing, that where a country is not doing what it is expected to do, the external environment can and should influence that country to do the right thing. Take the existence of the ICC, the International Criminal Court in Geneva. Gone are the days when you can act with impunity to abuse the rights of your citizens. Why? Because in 2005, states, including Nigeria, committed to what was then defined as responsibility to protect. If a government fails to protect its own citizens, others can mobilize to come in and force that government to do the right thing. And so now, when we are talking about our foreign policy, and I talked about the content, I talked about the character, these go to bear on what? What you have in your hands, how you are managing it, and whether or not it is sufficient. I referred also much earlier that in 2016, there was a retreat that my humble self organized in Kaduna for the two committees of the National Assembly on Foreign Affairs, both the Senate and the House. And we were quite fortunate to have had a good representation from the National Assembly at that first ever retreat. to look at the interface between the three managers of Nigeria's foreign policy. And who are these managers? The three arms of government bear on the management of Nigeria's foreign policy. But you find out that there is no collaboration or cooperation between these three arms. There is also no institutional arrangement to bring them regularly to interface with one another. And thirdly, a recognition of the boundary lines when it comes to role and responsibility. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is the manager of Nigeria's foreign policy, cannot go and legislate on Nigeria's foreign policy. But the National Assembly, too, that makes the law, does not bear the responsibility of implementation. It is through the oversight responsibility of the National Assembly, for instance, the appropriation power of the National Assembly that can be brought to bear to make sure that when money is allocated for foreign policy management, that it is used judiciously, that it is accountable, and that it is effective. The legislature has the responsibility to interpret the law. But when the three come together in a manner that ordinary Nigerian that is asking, what do you do for me outside? You're an ambassador. I should be able to tell the Nigerian that my work as an ambassador is impacting him or her in this way or that way. Yeah. That's how it should be. And that the man on the street then, whether they can read or write or not, will understand and appreciate that an ambassador is there speaking for them. And so, all that we are saying today is create a forum where it will be open, where the presentation will be simple enough, and that indeed everyone will have the opportunity to speak, so that when you come to collect the views that are expressed, you can calibrate them and say, these are our priorities today. So that's one of the objectives of a review. Whether you call it comprehensive or not, it doesn't matter. It is what comes out of it.
All right. So from all indications, your perspectives to this conversation are all very pertinent, with respect to the issue of reviewing our foreign policy. Let me return to Ambassador Joe Keshi. Now, we couldn't have Yusuf Baba Yakub, Chairman Committee on Foreign Affairs, House of Representatives, and they are already working on this review. What would be your advice? You told us earlier on that you were at one of their sessions and you were not satisfied, with the, makeup of, attendees there, which shows that perhaps from your own understanding, they have not really, brought together key players that will make a useful contribution to the review. Now, what will be your advice to the National Assembly with respect to this review? We're actually running out of time, but let's get your view on what they should be doing. What do you expect from them from this very point before the review gets into first or second reading, as the case may be?
Well, thank you. Just two quick comments in that. In relation to your question, and I think Ambassador Lolo made reference to lack of coordination or involvement of the National Assembly. And this was the advice I gave to members of the National Assembly, when I spoke at the event, that I have no clear idea on how oversight functions are defined, but oversight functions in the context of the Nigerian legislative body has become a source for financial transactions. So I said to the members of the National Assembly who were present that, listen, as a permanent secretary, the few times I went to the House to say to them, let me brief you privately about one or two policies, they were not interested. And I said to them, until you get interested in policy, until you begin to invite not just the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but all ministries to come and talk about policy, not just budget or inspection of projects. Policy is the essence of what leads to implementation. And if they don't pay attention to policy, if they don't understand policy, how can they be an effective partner in the execution of Nigeria's foreign policy? And this was the advice I gave them. Focus on policy. Invite the minister, invite the nation, and do a private, as they do in other parts of the world. Say, look, we understand you are doing, like in Chad now. I would be glad to hear that members of the National Assembly has invited the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the defense institutions to say, look at the situation in Chad. Please enlighten us, brief us on what is going on. But you don't get that. And let me go back. Let me also refer to what the question Kingsley has spoken. I mean, the concern of Kingsley about the university. It's unfortunate, actually. I grew up in Ibadan. By the time I went to the University of Ibadan, I can tell you I knew, not in person, but I knew quite a lot of professors. Why? Because they were those who defined, they were those who led national discourse, especially on the pages of newspapers. Today, they have all disappeared. As an undergraduate, anytime we organize an event, it was so easy, seamlessly, to look across all Nigerian universities and decide which university dorm we want to invite to our event. I have had occasion under ACAN, for example, to organize some issues on as a member of the ACAN program committee. One of the difficulties we have identifying people from the universities, because university dorms today have virtually gone quiet. You don't seem to have an idea of what they are doing, and they are not engaged, so they've just left the public space, which is why you have all kinds of jokers, occupying the public space today, and it's part of the leadership failure in this country. I give you a typical example of what I'm trying to say. In applying to the University of Ife, I applied to study agricultural economics, or whatever it is. Kingsley and everybody in the studio, at that time as a young man, I have practically no clue what it means, what they do. But because the Vice Chancellor was described as an agricultural economist, and he was projected, and he was writing a few articles that I was reading, I just find the whole thing very interesting. And I said, sure, I want to be like this man. I'll go and try agricultural economics. I have no idea of what they do. But unfortunately, I ended up doing political science in Ibadan. So the universities need to begin to project themselves and help us. You go to a lot of conferences, you probably see one or two. And believe me, you're also not satisfied with the one or two that you see. So a lot of changes need to take place, not just around the foreign policy, but in our institutions, in academics, and everywhere. My best advice is we need to get everybody, but we must get the quality people, and people must be knowledgeable, which is what I think is lacking with respect to the National Assembly.
All right, Ambassador Joe Keshi, thank you very much there for your comments. Professor Bola Akinteriwa, it's always a challenge asking you to be brief because even your prefatory statements, get on and on, but we are pressed for time right now. One aspect I wanted to raise, I want to skip it, but I also want to raise it. In the practice field of our diplomacy, this has caused some financial consequences for us. Nigeria appears to be a signatory to any and every treaty and protocol, sometimes with very little understanding of the key issues and the implications that has for us. One exception that we have seen recently is the African Continental Free Trade Area, that President Buhari said, no, hold on, we're going to have a review and a deeper understanding before we proceed. What do we need to do in this regard so that officials don't just get up and then sign? And when you sign, you are bound.
Well, thank you again. There is the level of signing. There is the level of ratification. In the context of Nigeria, there's always the level of domestication. In fact, the beginning is at the level of what they call paraffin, when the permanent representatives will normally negotiate and initial before coming to signing proper. The African Free, Continental Trade Agreement, the government of Nigeria did well by that time by saying, wait, we want to study, we want to review. This particular time, the concept of review is very appropriate. The issue was that at the domestic level, we were yet to identify, to delineate what interests would be at stake. We were actually not producing enough. So you want a free trade area, you want to open your borders, but at the end of the day, it can only be for inflow of foreign goods. You do not have goods, products in exchange. So when you take a critical look at it from that perspective, I think Nigeria's policy attitude was proper.
Well,
as
Cicely rightly pointed out, it's always difficult to ask Prof to be brief. Well, a Prof is always a Prof, especially in a conversation that he is well grounded. So on this note, we are closing down this edition of Good Morning Nigeria. I want to thank all of you for watching the program, and first of all to appreciate our guests who actually did justice to the topic for today. Professor Bola Akinterenwa, former Director General, Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, who joined us via Skype. We thank you so much, sir. And then Ambassador Joe Keshi, former Permanent Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs, also joined us via Zoom. Well, it's always good to have you on our show. Thank you indeed for coming this morning. And again, Ambassador Bulus Lolo, former Permanent Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs, also thank you for being part of our program this morning.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Okay, so that does it for us today on Good Morning Nigeria. We're back tomorrow, same time as always, 7 in the morning. Until then, take care of yourself. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Kirian Omayo. Have a great day.
Let's blow your trumpets. Advertise on NTA News 24.